Hello, I'm Jan Newharth, Chair and Chief Executive Officer of the Freedom Forum. Welcome to First Five Live, a Freedom Forum conversation series exploring the complex challenges our First Amendment freedoms face today and featuring current newsmakers who put their freedoms into practice. The Freedom Forum recently released the results of a survey asking a diverse group of more than 3,000 Americans what they know and believe about the First Amendment. Our findings show that Americans overwhelmingly consider the First Amendment vital. But our nation is also deeply divided and uncertain about key First Amendment issues. Today, we'll look at how freedom of speech, the best known First Amendment freedom, faces urgent and important tests, particularly around hostile or hateful expression, and how or if it should be moderated. You'll have an opportunity to brush up on your First Amendment knowledge and hear arguments that strengthen your views or change your mind from two experts. Nadine Strossen, author of Hate, Why We Should Resist It with Free Speech, Not Censorship, and Thane Rosenbaum, author of Saving Free Speech from Itself. This program is brought to you by the Freedom Forum, which fosters First Amendment freedoms for all. Our vision is an America where everyone knows, understands, values, and defends the freedoms of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. And now, here's what a cross-section of Americans say about freedom of speech.
I think we can agree to disagree.
Hate speech needs to have limitations.
Conservative voices get censored, liberal voices don't.
All the freedoms in the First Amendment ride on having the ability to speak our minds and to voice our opinions freely.
If we don't speak up, we'll be overlooked. And things won't ever change.
I need to be able to express myself during a pride parade, during a job interview, for health care.
Freedom of speech is more than just speech. It encompasses the freedom of expression as well.
You can talk amicably or agree to disagree, but when it becomes violent and harassing, then that's where the boundaries need to be drawn.
I don't like some of the speech that is considered to be free.
I don't think hate speech should necessarily be protected, but people should still have freedom of speech.
People have hated people for years and years. Heck, if you were in Salem and you didn't like somebody, you call them a witch, and next thing you know, they're being dunked in a river.
People get offended for many different things. You never know.
Good afternoon, and welcome to First Five Live. I'm Kevin Goldberg. The results of the Where America Stands survey, released this past September 22nd, offer some amazing insight into what Americans understand and feel about the freedoms of religion, speech, press, assembly, and petition. While our respondents overwhelmingly, almost unanimously, agree that the First Amendment remains vital, digging deeper reveals various fault lines, particularly in the area of hate speech. For instance, 57% of Americans, a slight majority, know hate speech is protected by the First Amendment. When it comes to whether hate speech should be protected, 36% say no, believing that preventing hate speech is more important than protecting free speech. And almost equal numbers say protecting free speech should be prioritized. Some of the conflict might arise from the fact that hate speech is clearly controversial, but also potentially misunderstood. Other countries' laws and various international treaties explicitly prohibit hate speech, and in so doing, define the term. But in the United States, the full protection of hate speech under the First Amendment means there is no official definition. We just know it when we see it. Or do we? Most people would agree that hate speech is public speech that expresses hate toward a person or group based on something such as race, religion, gender, or sexual orientation. Easy in theory, difficult in application. After all, I think our panelists would agree that the neo-Nazis who sought a permit in 1977 to march through Skokie, Illinois, a location chosen in part because of the high number of Holocaust survivors who lived there, were engaging in hate speech. But what if you knew the purpose of the march was to advocate for the free speech rights of the National Socialist Party of America? Or what about the members of the Aryan Nation who marched in 2012 in my neighborhood in Washington, D.C., to protest a so-called genocide targeting white farmers in South Africa? They weren't targeting a specific minority. They also engaged in what they believed to be political protest. And if anything, the debate over hate speech versus free speech has intensified while becoming ever more nuanced as more voices enter the public debate via social media. Just look at Dave Chappelle's Netflix special, The Closer, which was released in October 2021, just days ago. Those within the LGBTQ+ community and their supporters criticized it as transphobic hate speech. This was met with a response that Chappelle was not only engaged in free speech, but offering valuable commentary on a matter of public concern. An example of the boundary-pushing comedy that 65% of our survey respondents say they support. See, it's really complex. That's why I'm grateful that we have with us today two people whose credentials and, frankly, style and hair I'd die to have. Nadine Strossen is the New York Law School's John Marshall Harlan II Professor of Law Emerita. Prior to joining the world of academia, she was the president of the American Civil Liberties Union from 1991 to 2008. Thane Rosenbaum is a professor at Touro College, where he is also the director of the Forum on Life, Culture, and Society. He's a legal analyst for CBS News Radio and a columnist for the Jewish Journal. Both Nadine and Thane are prolific writers on hate speech and on free speech generally. Nadine has authored or co-authored several books, including Hate, Why We Should Resist It with Free Speech, Not Censorship. Last year, Thane published Saving Free Speech from Itself. But today they're here to talk, and it won't be for the first time. Full disclosure, Nadine and Thane have spoken together on this topic many times in the past, and in fact, are friends, demonstrating that it is possible to be friends with people even when you differ on issues big or small in your conversation. So let's get right to it. Well, so I will start things off pretty open-ended. I'll ask the first question, but before I do, I want to invite the people in our live viewing audience to send us questions during this event using the chat feature or to tweet them to us at @FirstForAll. So, Nadine, Thane, the first question goes to both of you. How would you define hate speech? And also explain your general position as to why it should or should not be regulated or punished under law. Let's start with Nadine, and then we'll turn to Thane.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and to you and the Freedom Forum for hosting this important event, doing the very interesting survey, and Thane for sharing the platform again, actually because of our friendly disagreements. Kevin, you did an excellent job in pointing out that the concept of hate speech, from now on I won't use the scare quotes, but I hope that people will keep them in mind, is a concept that has no fixed, agreed upon legal meaning, certainly not in the United States, precisely because the Supreme Court has refused to recognize a category of speech based on its so-called hateful content and said, therefore, it should not be protected. It is an inherently subjective term. And this is true when you look at the definitions in the legal codes around the world where countries do outlaw hate speech. There is constant debate and disagreement and misapplication of a term that is inherently, irreducibly subjective. Hate is an emotion. What one person considers hateful, somebody else considers to be loving, cherished, important speech. I can give examples from public discourse in the United States where people freely bandy about the term to apply to whatever speech they personally happen to hate. So in this country, many people have attacked speech by Black Lives Matter. Many officials have attacked speech by Black Lives Matter as alleged hate speech. Others have attacked speech on behalf of Blue Lives Matter as hate speech. On some campuses, the term free speech has been attacked as hate speech, precisely because of the inherent, inevitable discretion in enforcing such a subjective term. I do not want to empower government to punish it. Not surprisingly, in fact, completely predictably, in countries that do outlaw hate speech, those laws have disproportionately been used to silence the voices of the very members of minority groups and political dissenters who are hoped to be protected by the law. But those who enforce the law, of course, are going to do it consistent with the establishment power values, not to empower those who have been traditionally marginalized or dissented.
Thanks. Thane, your definition of hate speech and why it should or should not be regulated.
Thank you, Kevin, for inviting me here, and thanks to the Freedom Forum. And it's always lovely seeing Nadine and hearing Nadine. Many of you should know that she's not just a friend, and we've done this many, many times, but she really is the first lady of the First Amendment, in my view. And I can say as many times as we've done this, I've never won these debates. So I don't have much hope here again. But let me just say a few things, because I actually think, you remember in Rocky III, I think he decides to fight Lefty. So I might choose to switch in a different way as we talk about this issue. But when Nadine says hate is invariably subjective, it doesn't have to be. It's subjective because now we live in a world of a cancellation culture, that anything that we disagree with, anything that we find insulting or offensive, we deem to be hate speech. But that's just preposterous. Every example that Nadine gave us is preposterous. It's not her fault, but it's people are actually walking around, people that purport to be sane, and are saying that if you agree, if you have an opinion on the SATs and you're in favor of the SATs, that's white supremacy. If you want to see what happened in Hunter Biden's laptop, that's white supremacy. If you think that voters should have ID cards, that's white supremacy. Let me just tell you something. Progressives have put the Klan out of business. There's no reason for the Klan to burn a cross anymore on an African American's lawn, because they know that because of the progressive politics of our age, all white people are essentially white supremacists. There's no distinction made between people who are not racists and people that don't follow the complete set of protocols of critical race theory or intersectionality or Black Lives Matter. And so what I've been arguing for years with Nadine is the following. Hate speech is not speech that offends or insults. It's not about that. It's word speech signage that's used intentionally as weapons, as acts of violence, right? It's not a matter of an opinion. It's your expression and the way that it is devoid of an actual argument. It's not an argument. It doesn't participate in the marketplace of ideas. It's an action that is an act of violence to intimidate, frighten, scare, deprive people of dignity, deprive people of their sense of citizenship. So they're too afraid to even show up to the public square to have a debate within representative democracy. So Nadine and I have argued about this for years. I think it's absurd that the example that you gave, that neo-Nazis could march on a community of Holocaust survivors and a vulnerable group 25 years after the liberation of Auschwitz. The ACLU successfully got them a permit. I think they should have been marched right to jail, just like they are in Europe. Remember what Nadine said about other countries in Western Europe. What she didn't say is we are an outlier. We are the only Western democracy in the world that doesn't have a category to prohibit hate speech. What makes us different? What do we know that every other Western democracy that also is based on natural rights and the enlightened philosophers of the 18th century, why do we know it differently? I do not think that burning a cross on a family African American's lawn is your way of saying I'm opposed to affirmative action, right? That's an act of violence. Marching on Holocaust survivors, burning a American flag and say in front of a family that just lost a son in a war fighting for this government. If you think that that's what James Madison thought free speech meant, or George Washington, can you imagine if we told George Washington, oh, no, Mr. President, this means you can burn a flag right in the face of a family that just lost their son fighting for this country. So I'm saying it's not so subjective. We've made it subjective. I think we know through the neuroscience today that words delivered in certain ways actually cause harm, not just mental harm, but physical sickness.
So go ahead, Nadine, sorry.
Virtually everything that Thane said. I know we have limited time, so I'll have to be very, very selective. First of all, Thane intermixed in a lot of his commentary expression that is appropriately punishable under First Amendment principles. The First Amendment does not absolutely protect all speech. It does say that government may never suppress speech solely because of disagreement with the viewpoint, the content, the idea, or the message. And that is a very important principle because in our democratic republic, it is up to we, the people, to decide what ideas to adhere to, which ones to reject, not for the government to decree that. But sensibly, when you get beyond the content or the message of the speech and you look at it in its overall context, if in the facts and circumstances the speech directly, imminently causes certain specific, serious harm, including a threat, including intimidation, including assault. These are all examples that Thane gave. Sensibly, those can all be punished consistent with American law. Now, Thane goes on to hail the situation in other countries that basically share our form of government. I would be very curious as to which one he thinks is doing a great job in terms of redressing hatred and discrimination and violence on many bases. Let's go to the example of Germany, which is very poignant for me because my own father was a Holocaust survivor. And I know that the Nazis rose to power in the Weimar Republic in Germany, not because of the absence of hate speech laws, but in part because of the presence of hate speech laws that were used to prosecute Nazis, and they were actually prosecuted multiple times, convicted. The leading Jewish organization of the day said that these laws were basically enforced fairly, and the Nazis loved it. These became propaganda platforms for them, drawing attention that they otherwise would never have received, sympathy that they otherwise never would have received. The problem was they got away with murder, literally. While Germany was busy suppressing speech, it was not outlawing actual violence, including murder against minorities, against political minorities, and so forth. And we see the same thing in Germany today, which still has extremely strict hate speech laws. Yes, we have serious problems of anti-Semitism in this country, but I would not trade it for Germany, where for the first time in history, a couple of years ago, Chancellor Angela Merkel had felt bound to appoint a cabinet-level minister of anti-Semitism because of the rampant violence and hatred against not only Jews, but murders against refugees, against immigrants, against political supporters of immigration. So there is certainly no correlation between laws that outlaw hate speech and actually bringing about equality and ending hatred. And, you know, Thane has a very clear definition in his mind that opinions, political opinions, should not be punished. In fact, political opinions are punished every single day in European countries, including Germany, where their hate speech laws actually punish people who have certain views on immigration. They even punish leaders of Jewish communities who call out hateful speech. These laws are very blunt tools. I would absolutely rather rely on the sensible distinction that our law draws, which allows the most dangerous speech to be punished, and it also outlaws the most dangerous censorship.
Well, I think what one of the things you referred to earlier, Nadine, was the concept of what we look at in the United States in terms of some low-value categories of speech that are already well-defined through the courts. In particular, we have something else here at the Freedom Forum called the First Five Explainer, and we are releasing one this week in honor of what is Free Speech Week, which thank you for joining us for this Free Speech Week event. And we do an explainer on I do an explainer on some of these low value areas of speech, such as 3 in which you've referred to specifically, I think, without naming them exactly as I will here: incitement to imminent lawless violence, the fighting words doctrine, which is basically a face-to-face confrontation that provokes somebody into a physical response, and the true threats doctrine. So those are pretty well specifically defined. Thane, why are these not sufficient to guard us against the hate speech we really need to prevent, but allow all the free speech we want to have around matters of public concern?
Both you, Kevin, and Nadine forgot to say that, in fact, we don't do it. We might have the potential to do it. You know, Nadine may be right. I argue in my book, yes, we should be using the fighting words doctrine. We don't. The Supreme Court has been very clear. All the examples for what Nadine is saying, hey, we already have the rule in place. Well, if we do, why do we have cross burnings? Why can Nazis march into vulnerable communities of Holocaust survivors? Why can you disrupt military funerals because you object to gays serving in the military? Why can you burn flags if, in fact, those rules are in place? I would argue they're not in place. What's in place is the basic concept, which is free speech means that we will attribute anything you say out of your mouth, even if you're a lunatic, even if you behave in a boorish, loutish, violent way, we will default to saying you have an idea there. Instead of saying, no, that's not an idea. You have it, you want to hand out some leaflets, good luck to you. But marching with tiki torches at night, chanting, Jews will not replace us, is not the best way to make an argument against discrimination. There are other ways to do this. The fact that we never challenge these groups. The ACLU provided the actual right for the alt-right in Charlottesville, and Nadine is nodding her head because she's enormously proud of that. But she also knows that 200 staffers from the ACLU after Charlottesville wrote a letter to the then executive director, he still may be the same executive director, saying, essentially, what the hell are we doing? Now, I knew this must have driven Nadine nuts, but they were literally saying, what the hell are we doing? Why are we in the business of providing first-rate pro bono legal work for a bunch of clowns that have no business, they have no interest in promoting ideas, they have only one interest, to cause harm to other human beings, to deprive them of their citizenship, to basically say to them, you do not count. You do not matter. We're not interested in you being here. Get out, towelhead. Get out, Jew. Get out, N-word, right? Get out. Get out is not what our founders were about. Our founders, when they incorporated the First Amendment, speech in the First Amendment, were interested in public squares, soapboxes, marketplaces of ideas where there would be rigorous debate the way that the Freedom Forum is showing it today, with two buddies going at it, raising questions, and so the audience can go, you know what, I had never thought about that before. That's an interesting point. And then Nadine and I will walk away friends. That is very different than for me saying to Nadine, get out, I don't like you. I don't like your father that he was a Holocaust survivor. That is not what James Madison or George Washington or Alexander Hamilton, none of them imagined what we have essentially enabled as speech and ideas. We grant everything the privilege of ideas, and we allow it to completely supersede all other values. Dignity, human dignity, by the way. Not only do we not have hate speech codes like in Europe, we also, in our founding documents, we don't have the word dignity. We don't seem to care about human dignity in the same way that the European countries do. That's why they prohibit hate speech. It doesn't appear in the Declaration of Independence. It's not in the Constitution. And so what I'm saying is that we need to really rethink, what does it mean to be a citizen of the United States? My favorite quote in my recent book is from Lyndon Johnson. And he said, a man has a right to go outside of his house with his children without being publicly humiliated. Yeah. Exactly. That's what it means to be a citizen. to not fear going into the public square, to go freely and to say, I am here, I belong here, and I have the right to participate in representative democracy. And that's not what cross-burners are saying. That's not what neo-Nazis are saying. That's not what people that disrupt military funerals who are opposed to gays serving in the military, that's what they're saying. They're saying you have no right to be here.
Well, so again, the devil is in the details. And Thane, you are generalizing. You're saying everything a neo-Nazi says is but inherently intimidation or threats or fighting words and therefore subject to punishment. That's not true. The permit that not only the ACLU argued for, but that the judge granted was for a demonstration specifically for purposes of protesting the removal of the Robert E. Lee statue from a public square. I happen to disagree with that point of view, but that's the point of view. The police chief testified there was no evidence of any plot of any violence. If there were violence that were to come about, the police chief testified in that hearing, we're completely prepared to protect people. What actually happened? The night before, 250 or so of these Unite the Right demonstrators do march in a menacing, intimidating fashion, brandishing lighted tiki torches. This was not permitted. This is not what they asked for a permit for. It's not what the ACLU defended their permit request for. It's not what the judge granted them permission to do. They menaced at close distance people who were demonstrating against their ideas, brandishing lighted tiki torches. And as the conclusion of the nonpartisan report that was done by the city council afterwards shows, that crossed the line. That is not protected speech. That is an unprotected true threat and intimidation. And they should have been arrested at that point. And the ACLU would be the first to argue it. Likewise, with respect to Skokie, again, everybody describes, as you did, Thane, these neo-Nazis marching upon the Holocaust survivors, where they were trembling in their houses. That would have been horrible. That's actually not what happened. They were marching on a sidewalk outside City Hall, which there was no residence nearby. And as Kevin alluded to in his introduction, they weren't saying anything that was overtly anti-Semitic. They were carrying signs that said free speech for white people. Now, maybe your argument, Thane, is that anything that comes out of the mouth of a Unite the Right demonstrator or anything that comes out of the mouth of a neo-Nazi should automatically be treated as hate speech. But to me, that goes back to the problem of punishing ideas, not punishing the threats, which are already punishable under our law.
So I do have a question from one of our viewers, and they ask, would disagreements about hate speech disappear if the term hate speech were discarded as the media term of art in favor of intimidating or insightful speech? Thane, why don't you start with that?
Well, let me just quickly answer what Nadine said. I think, Kevin, you said earlier the neo-Nazis marched in your hometown of Washington, D.C. I don't have a problem with that. Yeah, I don't have a problem with that.
No, I didn't either. And you didn't actually hear them. It was amazing.
What Nadine is saying is not true. I'm saying, yes, Nadine, by the way, this is the only time I'm able to trump Nadine Strossen. Both my parents were Holocaust survivors. Both were in death camps. I would say, Nadine, that if you choose to march and even say not one word, but to dress up as Nazis and goose step into the village green of a town that it just so happens, Nadine didn't mention this, but it was a quirk of sociology. Skokie happened to have the largest concentration of Holocaust survivors in the United States per capita. The Nazis knew where they were going. They didn't go to Brooklyn. They thought Skokie actually had more Holocaust survivors. That act itself is an act of violence, an act of intimidation, no matter what they say. And I think that's the difference. I don't have a problem with them marching in your neighborhood unless, Kevin, you tell me that we had an overwhelming number of Holocaust survivors. The intent is clear in those instances. The intent of cross-burning is clear. The intent is there to say, you don't count. We don't want you to be here. We're not interested in debating you. We're not interested in arguing an idea. We're simply saying get out. And that's what I'm saying. Now, as for the question posed from our audience member, yeah, I think it's an excellent point because of what I said before. We've muddied what hate means. What we've said is we've proven everything that Nadine Strossen said today is true. What is that? Subjective. Everything she said is true, because if we call everything hate speech, right, I sort of carved it out, but if we're going to call everything hate speech, if hate speech is to say that some of the peaceful protests actually had riots in Black Lives Matter, that's called hate speech. It's not. There's nothing racist about that. Having questions about black on black crime in Chicago, no, that's not racist. The problem is now we're literally afraid to speak. The enemy for free speech nowadays, and Nadine and I this is on something we probably really agree on. The enemy of free speech is no longer the government, it's the people. The government isn't even in the censorship business anymore. Who is it? Relatives and friends and colleagues and employers and social media and Twitter mobs and Twitter trolls and corporate censors and private censors. Now, again, the First Amendment doesn't theoretically apply to any of them because those are not the government censorship, but we're really talking about what we are preventing today in speech. What we're really talking about is censorship by individuals against other individuals, purporting to say that what you just said was racist and therefore hateful.
That last point, and if I can just briefly comment on the question, the thrust I take from the question is it doesn't matter so much what the label is, but what the underlying concept is. And my position is that the underlying concept of the categories of speech that are already unprotected and subject to punishment, including intentional incitement of imminent violent or lawless conduct that's likely to happen imminently, including fighting words, including a true threat, that and there are a few more, targeted harassment or bullying, that is sufficient to allow the government to punish speech that happens to have a hateful message, as well as other speech that literally does pose an imminent threat of danger. The government does not need any more power to punish any more hateful speech beyond those established categories.
So I want to pick up on something that Nadine really quickly.
You're going to cite to me a 1948 case, Brandenburg versus Ohio. There are no precedents. So Nadine may be right. I would agree with her. I said it in my book. The fighting words doctrine is sitting out there and should have been used all this time. We obviously do not have the.
You're looking at the Supreme Court, which decides very few cases on any topic. But in fact, all of these doctrines are enforced regularly at the lower court level.
I'm just not. I'm sorry, Nadine. I'm not aware of them. I'm just not. I'm not aware.
I'll send you an article.
I'm not aware. I'm aware of the sense of specialness that we have. That we say, well, you know what? Our country is so free. We let Klansmen, neo-Nazis, homophobes all have their day and have their say. And I say, yeah, I think that one person's sense of greatness is another person's lunacy. And I don't think that this makes us special or is a demonstration of the strength of our democracy. I think it makes us seem ridiculous that we think that these people are actually engaged in a debate of ideas and that they deserve to participate in the marketplace of ideas and to be given permits. What Nadine described with the tiki torches may not have been in the original documents, but I don't think any of the ACL lawyers doubted that that's what would happen. I don't think they doubted that they would.
Okay, I defend your right to engage in defamation, but that's really absolutely incorrect. And the point is, one is not defending or glorying in the particular message. One is defending a principle, which is especially important for those of us who are advocates of human rights, because to this day, It is us and members of minority groups, political as well as demographic minorities, who are the ones who are attempted disproportionately to be suppressed as engaging in hate speech. There's a reason why every crusader for racial justice, among other human rights causes throughout US history, opposed government censorship, including censorship of hate speech, because it was their ideas that were targeted as being hateful, terrorist, dangerous, violent, and so forth. And that is still happening today with pipeline protesters, with Black Lives Matter activists, with other social justice crusaders constantly having threats against their free speech. So one should not get hung up on particular examples of the principle where one happens to disagree with a speech, but ask yourself, this principle is also going to be necessary to protect the opposite messages that are completely consistent with my own human rights values.
So I said I was going to ask a question, Nadine, but I actually think I'll come back to Thane about something here because it picks up on what Nadine just said and ties in something Thane said earlier, where you discussed the United States as being an outlier with regard to hate speech, and all of these other countries, particularly in Europe, having laws that prohibit hate speech. But is there any evidence, and I think Nadine kind of got to this, is there any evidence this works, or does it just push us into our own little factions, allowing these issues to fester and then explode like we see in Charlottesville, like we see, and you could almost, I think, draw a straight line sometimes from Charlottesville to January 6th at the Capitol?
Kevin, Nadine, democracies are imperfect. They're messy, right? I mean, what Nadine is describing is, yes, I'm sure that that's true, that all throughout Western Europe, there are examples that I would oppose of, oh, that doesn't sound like hate speech to me. I don't think a person should be imprisoned for something like that. I'm sure that's true. To me, that's not an argument to say that all bets are off. This is where Nadine and I disagree. She says, well, we already have the tools. I say, yeah, but we don't use them. So that therefore we really are giving a public square and a venue for lunatics that have nothing to say. They are not contributing to the marketplace of idea. They're only there to incite and intimidate and frighten and dehumanize and to strip people of their dignity. So yes, there obviously are mistakes that from a subjective point of view, but I think that's partly because the Europeans haven't tried to narrow it to what I'm describing. For instance, I don't know if in your introduction, you mentioned the Dave Chappelle case. In France, there is a comedian, his name is Mbala Dudonné. Nadine is nodding her head. She's familiar with him too, of course. He's not very well known in the United States at all. But this is his act. He gets up on stage and he says, there's just too many Jews around here. And he mentions the names of some well-known French Jews. And he goes, I think we should bring back the gas chambers and kill them in the gas chambers. That's his act. All right. I think that's very different than what we saw from Dave Chappelle. And I think that we can see a tale of two comedians. One guy, I'm not even sure whether Chappelle was trying to be funny. I don't think it was. I think that he was reinforcing, perpetuating really ugly, pernicious stereotypes. I don't believe he should be canceled. He, in my mind, soiled himself for me personally. I just thought it was a gratuitous, I don't understand what he was doing. But he's a comedian, for the love of God. He's not running for the Senate. And so I think that this backing away from him, I don't believe it was hate speech, at least with respect to the anti-Semitism, with the transgender issues. I won't speak to that, but I would say the same thing, that he is a comedian. It's very different from what Dudonné is saying. Dudonné is saying, let's kill Jews. And I think that's where I'm drawing the line. That's the perfect example of where hate speech kicks in. Germany, as Nadine said, because of our own family connection, the Germans are fanatical about not letting neo-Nazis run around because they know what neo-Nazis do. Nobody knows it better. That's the reason why they're very specific about Nazi flags, Nazi memorabilia, Nazi ideology, the promotions, because they understand that it leads to potentially mass murder, not to a good, rigorous debate about ideas.
So thanks. I actually have an audience question that comes in really quickly here, Thane, and then I'm going to come back to something for you, Nadine. Though you can pick up on this as well. We have an audience question that asks, how can we protect people who are targets of hate?
because that's really what I was going to get to.
Okay.
I was so struck when I was doing research for my book that so many human rights advocates in Germany, France, UK, Canada, all these countries that have anti-hate speech laws were arguing against ongoing enforcement of the laws, not because of any free speech principles. By definition, their countries allow, as a matter of free speech, for hate speech to be punished, but as a matter of strategic effectiveness. Their conclusion was that these laws are at best ineffective, at worst counterproductive in actually curbing hateful attitudes and actions. And I certainly would not champion what's going on in Germany in terms of the rise of neo-Nazi groups. The AfD, an explicitly racist party, has been doing extremely well in German elections around the country, and there are serious reports of infiltration of the military, and police and intelligence units in Germany are being infiltrated by this hateful ideology and practice and conduct and violence. So there's certainly no indication that these laws are effective in actually doing the job that we want them to do. So what do I advocate instead? And what do I'm sorry, I'm getting a message that my battery is running out. I thought my computer was plugged in. What do I and these other human rights advocates around the world propose instead? It is very strongly relying, number one, on laws against actual discrimination, laws against actual discriminatory violence, sometimes called hate crimes, and really importantly, counter speech, which is a very broad concept that extends to proactive education and information to propagate the ideas.
We may have just lost Nadine. So Thane, I think we will kind of take it out on this until, or ask you another question until she comes back in. You've talked about the concept of redeeming social value in speech. You asked once in another presentation I saw you give, where's the redeeming social value in marching Nazis through Skokie? You've also talked a lot today about the subjectivity and being very clear as to what hate speech means to you. But do we really want to put that decision in the hands of government, is my question.
Well, remember, Kevin, in most instances, we would put it in the hands of jurors, right? The jury would sit in judgment in determining the facts. We tell 12 people who know nothing about doing a heart surgery. We put them in charge of determining facts in a medical malpractice case. They don't know anything about that. They listen to a bunch of experts. I had a student one year raise her hand and said, yeah, but most people have been humiliated. Everyone knows about that. Nobody doesn't understand dignity. And I love that. I always quote her for this because she's right. She was an African-American student. And she said, why is this such a mystery? When you hear Nadine, she describes it as so subjective. And I'm saying, well, it doesn't have to be so subjective. The other thing that I didn't get a chance to respond to, we have always been told that the reason we are so lenient with providing speech is because good speech will cancel out bad speech. This comes to us from Oliver Wendell Holmes early in right around after before World War I. And so this goes back over 100 years. We add, and Louis Brandeis, Justice Brandeis also said that more speech is a disinfectant, right? But the answer is that's just not true in this marketplace. Because if that was true, why do we still have Nazis? Weren't the Nazis defeated in World War II? Why are they still with us? Why are we so confident that good speech will cancel out bad speech if they don't go away? And now that Nadine is back, let me respond to something that she said. I'm so glad you're back, Nadine. I don't like dancing without you. But I would say to her when she says, look, Thane, at the infiltration of the Nazis with the military, I would say, without these codes outlawing Nazism, I don't know whether we wouldn't have been in World War III a long time ago with Nazis retaking Germany. I'm not so sure that the fact that there's still neo-Nazis, look, there's always going to be anti-Semitism. There's always going to be racism. That's part of the problem with the cancellation culture, that there is simply no room for forgiveness. There's no room for moral complexity. There's no room for anything other than to cancel you and to make you go away. And so I'm just saying, yes, Nadine is giving us examples of a messy democracy called Germany that still can't lick their Nazism bug that they have. There's some predilection for that kind of fascism, just like we have some of it here in the United States. And, you know, it won't go away, but it doesn't mean that the government and the courts shouldn't take the strongest positions possible to say, this is not what it means to be a citizen in our country. And we don't allow someone else's free speech rights to trample over every other right that you have, especially the right to live peaceably among your other fellow citizens, and not to fear going outside, and not to be essentially told that you don't matter.
Problem, Thane, is underlying attitudes and actual actions. The expression is a superficial manifestation of a much deeper seated problem. And that's what we have to deal with. That's what I was starting to address through education, starting at the earliest ages, in encouraging in people, instilling in people understanding and mutual respect. You know, simply forcing underground the most superficial, violent expressions of hateful attitudes is not going to deal with that problem. Also, Germany was very late to the table in doing something that the U.S. has been doing, which is passing and enforcing laws against actual discriminatory conduct. Look, I think it's important to underscore that Thane and I are both really, really, really committed to combating hate. That's why I wrote the book. And I oppose censorship primarily because I just don't think it's an effective way to do that. And I'm so happy that the question raised other strategies. And there is so much promising research that's going on in the world. We now have interdisciplinary a field called hate studies, and social scientists and other experts, brain scientists, and others are really looking into what are the complex causes of these attitudes, and then conversely, how can we counteract them?
I think that is an excellent point to end on. We are all in favor of combating hate. I think that's we all agree. Free speech is important. Combating hate is important. I think that's a perfect place to wrap up, because that really is all the time we have for today. Thanks to Nadine Strossen and Thane Rosenbaum for a thoughtful dialogue on a very provocative topic. To all our viewers out there, what do you really think? Tell us via social media. We'll also be posting a recording of this event to our YouTube page and continuing the conversation with all of you in First 5 programs to come, exploring more of Where America Stands. You can read the full results of our survey at whereamericastands.org. Thanks for joining us, and happy Free Speech Week.